everyone. Welcome to another week of The Bookseller. It's me, Jessica Gillen, your host for this week, and always your host for every week. So, with that said, this week I'm bringing you a bomb book review on one that has been all over the interwebs. Get ready for Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in for another week of my wonderful book review show. I hope that this week will be a book that you have been kind of eyeing on your bookshelves, whether it's something you've recently bought, it's on Amazon, Goodreads, or even at your bookstore. You just kind of been hearing about this book, what have you. It is everywhere right now. We are trying to do as many reviews as possible that have the latest, greatest books that everyone is talking about, just to keep you in the know, keep you up to date with what's hip, what's cool, what people are reading. So with that said, it is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is book 1 in the Legacy of Orisha. So it's going to be a trilogy. That's exciting. This is a hardcover, 525 pages. So it's quite dense, pretty thick, not for the faint of heart, definitely for the reader that, I guess, really likes big books. But don't let that scare you. This was published March 6th of this year, so pretty recent, within the last 2 months. This has multiple perspectives. It switches between 3 different perspectives. 2 of them are female, 1 is male. The Goodreads rating of this is 4.34, so extremely high for Goodreads. People are loving this. I have seen so many 5-star reviews on this book. There's very, very, very few under 3-star ratings for this book that I've seen. And if I do see them, people don't really talk about that much of a problem with the book. There's like some things which we'll get into a little bit later, and you'll find out what I rated it. But for the most part, everyone is hyping this. Everyone is talking about this. People are reading it, loving it, and encouraging their friends and families to also read this. Amazon, which we know is kind of, they're a little bit more easygoing with their ratings, have rated this a 4.7 out of 5. I want to say it was over 600 reviews on Amazon. Now, that's pretty big hype and ratings for a YA release. Like I said, I've been hearing this book everywhere lately. And that is mainly because the author has gone on various talk shows and radio shows and podcast shows, kind of hyping this book a bit, and it is getting the attention. It was already bought by Fox Studios to be turned into a movie before it was even released. So we've seen that happen with a couple books I've read lately. But this one is probably the biggest hyped in the community, film and book. So with that said, Children of Blood and Bone has made headlines before the book was even published. This was all thanks to a lot of flashy deals, just in the sense of Macmillan, who is the publisher of this book, paid 7 figures to the rights to publish this trilogy. So even before it was a bestseller, it was hyped by the community, Macmillan jumped on this and offered a 7-figure pay. That is incredible, and it's huge for the book community. For a book to get that much initial hype, initial people giving this the credit it deserves, is crazy. So it's no surprise that this was kind of already bought, with Fox buying, the studio Fox buying the rights to this movie, or this book to be made into a movie. It also has the, I want to say, the producers of Twilight, as well as, I want to say, Maze Runner, are on the team to make this movie. So it is really big. I don't know if anyone's seen the Twilight movies. It's not the first director of Twilight, but the producing team of Twilight, as well as Maze Runner, are backing this. So that's huge. And just to throw a little tidbit out here, so I said that Macmillan paid 7 figures for the rights to this book to publish it. This is one of the biggest and highest payouts for a debut YA novel in history. And what's even crazier is the author is 23 years old. She just graduated from Harvard, and she's coming out swinging, making $1 million book deal, basically. That is just incredible and should really give a lot of drive to all you young readers out there and to us older folks that we can, no matter what, if we put our heart into something, we can make gold. She is 23 and now has a multi-million-dollar franchise out of this book that has only recently released book 1 in March of this year. That is insane. So you will hear about this book for sure, 100%. You're going to hear about, the next 2 for sure. So just get ready. Jump on this now if you want to be ahead of the curve. If you want to know what's in, read this now. All right, so enough of the book adaptation news, which is exciting and always a good thing. I feel like any book that has movie rights purchased to it kind of bring a lot more awareness and readers into our community, and more kids need to read. If more YA books are being bought the rights to, that just increases more people into wanting to read. And I am a huge advocate for teaching our young kids to read at an early age, telling them like, hey, this is a really great coping mechanism for you to escape into a different world. And it's in a safe way. I know a lot of kids like myself used video games as a way to escape, but books is just as good, if not better, for you to escape into, because it also kind of educates you, as well increases your vocabulary and makes your English scores on your SAT and ACT and college entry exams phenomenal. I will say that reading for me is how I got into college. My math scores were not great. My science scores were not great. As much as I love science, reading, having that almost 100% English score, almost 100% reading score. I want to say I had a 99 of 100 on my reading. Comprehension is so big and so important. So I'm so happy to hear that this book has already been is going to be adapted, has already had the rights sold to it, is just great. I'm not going to say it's going to be the next Harry Potter. Will it be the next Twilight? That is really, really a big possibility. All right, so let's talk about this description. This should be interesting because there's a lot of words I can't pronounce. All right, here we go. Zelly remembers the soil of Orisha, hummed with magic. Burners ignited flames, tiders beckoned waves, and Zelly's Reaper Mother summoned forth souls. But everything changed the night magic disappeared. Under the orders of a ruthless king, Magi were targeted and killed, leaving Zelly without a mother and her people without hope. Now, Zelly has one chance to bring magic back and strike against the monarchy. With the help of a rogue princess, Zelly must outwit and outrun the crown prince, who is hell-bent on eradicating magic for good. Danger lurks in Orisha, where snow leopardaires prowl and vengeance spirits wait in the waters. Yet, the greatest danger may be Zelly herself as she struggles to control her powers and her growing feelings for the enemy. All right, before we get into this plot and characters and the setting and all the good stuff, let's take our quick break, give you the latest and greatest from Eventide Entertainment. If you like my show, make sure to check out everything else we have to offer. Just get to know all of us. We're all unique. We all have different personalities and fun. I am the only girl on the team right now, but that's okay. I'm fine with that for now. I'm hoping eventually we can have more girls kind of join in this podcast community. So here we go. Let's take our quick minute break, and we'll be right back after this.
You know, there's nothing quite as satisfying as a good conversation with intelligent company.
Join comedian Don Smith every week as he sits down and talks with comedians, actors, filmmakers, writers, and everyday schmoes. It's The Life with Don Smith, Wednesdays at noon on 106.9 FM, and now available on the Eventide Entertainment podcast feed every Friday on Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes. Wednesdays on Eventide, Robert Yetter and Mike Shea sit down and throw albums at each other, talking about them, picking them apart, ripping them a new one. All different artists, all different genres, all different levels of suckage. It's Track Record, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. on the Eventide podcast feed. For more information, go to eventideent.com.
Okay, thank you for taking a quick listen to our commercial break here. Whether you got yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, maybe some cookies, I'm jealous because I can't eat that anymore. I am doing the keto lifestyle change at the moment. I do miss my cookies, I do miss my chips, but I still get my coffee and tea, so I'll join you there. But enjoy that cookie while it lasts. All right, enough of the silliness. We need to get serious. Books are serious. Nothing is fun about books. Just kidding. Why else would I have a show if I didn't find this fun? So, let's talk about the plot. Hopefully the description kind of got you started with what this is about. As you can tell, it is a fantasy book. I will classify this as high fantasy. You will understand why in a little while here. So the plot is quite interesting because it is set as a fantasy version of Nigeria. So we don't get a lot of books in YA period that have this setting at all. So that's cool and pretty awesome in my opinion. So Orisha was once home to about 12 Magi clans, and each had a god or goddess that had a signature magical ability that manifested in some members around the age of 13. So kind of a coming of age time period. Not all of them though, select few. The king, Sauron, cut off all access to magic across the kingdom and actually purged all the magi, leaving the children and sometimes even the spouses disempowered in every sense of the word. So every single magi 13 and up was killed. Completely massacred that entire group of people. So the Magi lost their languages and rituals and were really completely outlawed across the country. So if you tried to use the Magi language or certain rituals, you could get thrown into kind of like a concentration camp, but really it was kind of like a work camp. So the people or the children that were Magi's, they would have white hair. So since magic was outlawed and completely removed, magic is no more at this point in the story. They had their white hair still, so they still had the appearance of a magi. And the soldiers and other people for the kingdom would call these people or these children maggots. So they would make fun of them, talk down to them, were really harsh and critical of them. And usually the people that were enslaved were magi children, which is really sad. So Zelly is a magi, or she would have been had there still been magic in the world. She has her white hair, and she's kind of taught by a motherly figure who is teaching all the little magis at least some self-defense skills, just to at least be able to defend themselves if in case something was to ever happen. But really, it's done in such a hush-hush way because you can't show any sort of retaliation against your governing body that would sometimes lead to you being captured, enslaved, tortured, or even killed. So Zelly sets out on a mission to restore magic. Inon, who is the crown prince of the kingdom, is set to crush it. So there's one side, Zelly, who is there to want to bring it back, and the crown prince wants to destroy it because he takes after his father and he wants to do his father's work. That is what he's been taught his whole life. So their views, Inon and Zelly's views on vengeance, oppression, and the distribution of power, they really interact with each other because one is always on one side and the other is on the other side. So it's kind of like a yin and yang, so to speak. So this plot in general takes basically the best bits of YA fantasy. The princesses, the princes, tortured soldiers, the battle to restore magic versus suppress it. And it does something completely new to this genre. We don't really see a lot of this. I do have a couple books that this does remind me of, but we'll get into that when we talk more about the setting. So this book is really set as a fast-paced, action-packed adventure. So it is about restoring magic and setting out an adventure to get magic back. How do we do that? I won't really give that spoiler away, but it does happen about page 150, maybe 200. You kind of find out what the adventure is, where they have to go, how do they restore magic back. So it's kind of like a camp of misfits. There's the Magi, there's the princess, and then there's the Magi's brother who is not, doesn't have magic powers or magic abilities. He's really just the tough older brother who wants to protect his little sister, who is the Magi Zelly. And they set out on an adventure together to restore magic, all playing or all having a hand in seeking out and finalizing that mission. So there's all sorts of twists and turns and things that are like set them back or barriers that they have to overcome. Kind of all found in YA, as a lot of YA has that coming of age or growing aspects to the books. Like you see a lot of characters have arcs where they start at one point and they really come around, sometimes even full circle. So I would say every character definitely had an arc, and that was really powerful to see, and I think really inspirational for younger readers, as well as, you know, someone in their mid-20s or even older. Like, this is just a really beautiful story and has a lot of aspects that I think anyone of any age would enjoy. The sibling relationships, so the one between Zelly and her brother, is really awesome. There's definitely some give and take there. There's some battles for, you know, who's in charge, who's going to protect who. It's really awesome, and I think sibling relationships in books are always a lot of fun to read, and this is no different. And we also get the prince and princess siblinghood. You know, they were both raised under the same ruler, which was their dad, the king, as well as their mom, but they both took it in completely different ways. But again, because they're siblings, there is a little bit of a rift there that they remember when they were younger and how close they used to be and what happened to turn that. All right, so the characters. Zelly is the main character in the sense that most of the plot is surrounding or revolves around her and her decisions. She is not perfect, and instead is a greatly flawed character in the way of she has a lot of anger problems. She kind of outbursts. She doesn't really think before she acts. She's just kind of impulsive. She is insecure and has a lot of self-doubt about whether her abilities as a magi, especially since everything is falling on her hands, on her shoulders. Everything is up to her as basically the only magi that even has a little bit of magic ability. She's the only one that can fully restore magic back to the kingdom. There was a prophecy very early in the book, and it's her duty to fulfill it or to rid magic of the world forever. So she has a lot resting on her, and that's definitely stressful. And she does have a lot of self-doubt where she's like, can I do this? Am I the right person? I feel like this is too much responsibility all on one person. So something really cool about her is she always felt, even at the beginning of the book, she always felt that there was more that she wanted out of her life, that she wanted to carve her own path, so to speak. Her brother, who is her older brother, which isn't one of the narratives we get, but is kind of part of that team, is very protective of his sister, but also stands her ground with her and can be level-headed. And that kind of is a beautiful relationship to see and kind of is her other half. So when she's feeling weak or like she can't do something, her brother is there to motivate her. When her brother is kind of worried and doesn't feel like they can do this, she's there to be like, hey, we can, listen, I know this is hard. But she tells him, like, you inspire me to be stronger, to be tougher. And he kind of learns from her to make your own way, that every decision that you make matters and dictates how your life's going to shape in the future. So they're definitely a really great sibling relationship. There's some conflict there, but totally sibling conflict that we get even in real life. You know, siblings don't really get along here and there, but for the most part, they love each other. So that's really a big part of Zelly and who she is and what her narrative is about. Next, we have Amari, who is the princess of the kingdom. And so her whole storyline comes in that after she witnesses her handmaiden, who is also her best friend, get killed by her father's hands because she was a magi. So her handmaiden best friend was a magi. She had white hair, but she was enslaved to be kind of one of the handmaidens for Amari in the court, in the castle. And they became really close because they kind of grew up together. But Amari witnesses, just kind of by sneakily being around the castle, sees her father kill her. And that greatly disturbs her, shakes her to her core, and she steals the sacred scroll. And this sacred scroll is actually one of the magical pieces that will restore the magi and their magic. There's a couple of them. This happens early in the book, so I'm not spoiling too much. You have to have a little bit, just a little incentive to get you into the book. So she steals this scroll, which is a really big part of bringing the magic back to the magi. And she's always struggled with her place in the kingdom. Like, her mom has always told her to bleach her skin, to eat a certain way, to talk a certain way, that she's always ever been inside the castle or the kingdom. She's never been able to go outside the walls, so she doesn't even know the world that surrounds her. So something that her and her best friend, the handmaiden who died, have always talked about was getting out and getting away and seeing everything together. So when she sees her best friend get killed, it shakes her, and she's ready to just be impulsive, do something crazy, and she steals that scroll and goes out into basically the trade center, the area where all the trading and merchants are. So this is her main driving force, is just finally doing something that she always wanted, and if her best friend was there, would be by her side. So she's kind of living vicariously through her best friend and living up to those words that they always spoke to each other. So although she does have self-doubt and she wonders what she's doing, she is absolutely amazing, and her arc in particular is really awesome to see her really change as a person. She's very strong, has a great willpower to her. She's wonderful at sword fighting. Her confidence just grows with the story, and I really loved her. She's probably one of my favorite characters in the book. So on the flip side of that, we have Inan, who is the prince of the kingdom, her brother. And he's also the captain of the army. And he struggles throughout the book in wanting to please his father, the king, and also doing what he has been taught and his duty to his country, as he will one day become the king. However, you kind of find out then that he is actually also a magi. He had no idea that he was. We don't really know what happens. Again, giving you a little bit of spoilers just to kind of get you in. But I'm not going to give you everything. But you do find out that he is a magi. He has his white hair is coming through. And it really freaks him out. He is so freaked out because his whole life, his dad have said, basically the magi are the people that are going to ruin the world. They're going to ruin this country. We need to get rid of them. We need to make sure magic never comes back to the kingdom. So this really freaks him out because he's like, oh my gosh, my dad hates the magi and I'm a magi. I need to find Zelly. I need to find my sister and bring them to justice so I can show my father that I will live up to his words, that I will live up to being the king one day. And that's something he really struggles with. So, like I said, he really struggles with his magi powers as well as his sense of duty and the sense of his kingdom. And he also kind of has an issue with his dad. Like, he's scared because he's a magi. What's going to happen to him once his dad finds out? Like, will his dad basically cut him out of his life and get rid of him? Or what's going to happen there? And so that's why I feel like he really struggles with, should I just escape and get away? Or do I need to fulfill my duty and prove to my dad that I am not a magi, that I don't know why this happened to me or what, he's obviously over 13, so it's just crazy that this all of a sudden manifested. But he's just really afraid of how his dad's going to react, so he almost overcompensates his duty parts. So the villain of the novel obviously is the king, his dad, Sauron, which kind of sucked in the way that he was very two-dimensional. He wasn't a very compelling villain. It was just kind of like, yeah, he wants to kill a bunch of children, and he killed a bunch of magi and is very cruel. So you don't really have any sympathy, empathy, anything for his point of view. You just are like, yeah, he's a bad character. Which, for me, I really like when villains have more layers to them, that you start to understand their point of view. Like, okay, I can see why this is important to you. Kind of like Thanos in the new Avengers movie. Even though his point of view was wrong or was bad, at the same time, you empathize with him and you understood why he thought that way. That, okay, you know what? Coming from your point of view, I can understand why you feel this way and why this, in some ways, is a correct viewpoint. We don't get that with this character in here. That was a hang up for me. I just had to talk about it now because we're talking about the characters. The villain was just kind of a letdown. Not that great. All right, the setting. Here we go. This is the fun stuff, right? Especially with fantasy and world building. So the setting really reminded me of Shadow and Bone. For those of you not familiar with that, it's very similar in the sense that there's different geishas that have different powers that manifest in different ways. And it's very similar to the Magi in the sense that all their magic get manifested in different ways. And just to give you an example, some of the ways that the magic manifests in Magi is like controlling fire, controlling water, mind control, healing, controlling the dead. So for those of you that do know Shadow and Bone, I mean, most of those are already in that book as well. So in that sense, it wasn't like a new concept, but it is an interesting concept to me that I do like reading. Like Shadow and Bone was one of my favorite trilogies. So to kind of get a different world with similarities was kind of awesome for me and wasn't a huge hang up. I know some people struggled with the uniqueness of this book, but for me, the setting was unique. The characters were unique. Yes, the magic was not as unique, but at the same time, like, it was still really cool, and to get a completely different setting was also really nice. So the author herself has said that The Last Airbender and An Ember in the Ashes were some of the inspirations for writing this book, and you can definitely see both of those influences in this book 100%. So that's cool, but at the same time, it does kind of feel like it's not a completely original idea. But then again, it's really hard for a lot of originality, like complete originality in books. Like, we have to kind of borrow ideas or similarities from other books that inspire us, and we just kind of create it or take a spin in a different way. And that's exactly what this book was. Yes, I can see the influences, especially Shadow and Bone. I know she didn't use that as one of her influences, but how could that not be an influence? For me, because I did like those books, it was okay that I got a different spin. The fact that we get West Africa as a setting, which is so unique in itself, because we don't ever get novels, and definitely not fantasy novels, highlighting and using Africa as a setting. That to me was original. Really awesome that we finally get something different and something set in Africa. That never happens. And I am so excited for this to be turned into a movie, because I really think it's going to be a superstar kind of movie. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the setting, and then we'll get into my final thoughts. So I will say that the magic system, although I liked it, was confusing, especially for somebody if you didn't already have like the Shadow and Bone knowledge from reading those books and kind of getting it that way. It would be really difficult to understand the magic system in this book. It was seriously sometimes confusing for me, and I wish it would have been explained a lot better, or at least hashed out in a couple of chapters. Like, take the time. If this is 500 and something pages, take the time to explain the magic to me. I need to be able to understand. I mean, that's just, if this is what the fantasy book surrounds itself in, please explain it just a little bit more. I'm hoping that because this is a trilogy, we'll kind of get more of that in the second book, like way more deeper understanding of the history and how it was made. We did get a little bit of it, especially with the gods and goddesses and at the temples and stuff that they go to. But at the same time, it was still really confusing, especially in the early parts of the book. So there's actually a map at the very beginning of the book, which I always love when authors make a map of the area that they are talking about, because when she talks about a certain city or talks about a certain piece of land, you can flip back to the front of the book and be like, okay, I see where they are. And it's like a map to follow along, which really helped to paint a clear picture in my head and be able to visualize and use my imagination to build the story in my head. Because while I'm reading, I always have kind of like a movie playing in my head while I'm reading. So the fact that I got to flip to the front of the book and really understand the area was awesome. And I know a lot of fantasy books do that, and I just want to say, yes, keep doing that. That is what we need, especially in a fantasy book, especially with completely new areas that you're making up, at least cities and mountains and deserts. It's really great, and I was so very happy that we had that. And one of my favorite cities there was this city in the desert. Oh my gosh. The way she was able to vividly describe that city, and even some of the others, was the best part of the writing. It was so, so good. She is a very, very, very good world builder. I could completely visualize the environment, the cities, the paths they were taking, the adventure. That was superb, phenomenal, really outstanding in that regard. All right, so what did I rate this? I rated this a 4.5 out of 5. So I felt like it was really actually difficult for me to get into this at the beginning. And that's because this is really high fantasy. A lot of things, or a lot of words, I don't really know how to pronounce, and that sometimes takes away from it. But eventually I did kind of either look online or asked for help, just how to pronounce things. And once I was able to do that, it was easier for me to read. But also, with a high fantasy book, you really want to set time to read it. Like a couple hours where you could be like, all right, I can read probably about 100 pages in these 2 hours. That is how you want to read fantasy books. And unfortunately, the reason it took me so long to read this was because my life for the last 2 weeks with work, I've just been crazy. It has been very, very difficult for me to sit down, take a minute, and just read for a while. Especially with a book like this that requires a lot of concentration. I was constantly being pulled out of it because I had to do a work thing, or I was getting a phone call, or I had to do errands, or there was always something pulling me away from this book. But once I was on my work trip and actually able to sit down and read this, I blew through this book. With that said, yes, it did take me a little bit of time to get into it. I wouldn't say that's the fault of the writing or the pace. I felt like the pace was really good. It was just because it's so complex and the magic system wasn't completely hashed out. It was a little confusing, that part, that when I would read and then have to leave and then the next day I would get to read again, it was kind of like I had to reread some of the past chapters just kind of in a skimming sense. Like I would have to skim past chapters just to kind of refresh my brain, like, oh, okay, this is the setting we're in, and kind of reimagining it in my brain. So I really loved reading this. I am so excited to see this in the movie because I think the action scenes, the battle scenes are really going to be awesome, and we are going to get a little bit of reprieve from the narratives because another sucky thing, I guess this is another reason I ticked off some points, was the narratives were great. I didn't mind having the switching narratives, which sometimes kind of irritates me a little bit, but I did like it. The only problem is because at least 2 of those 3 narratives were always together, it was like you would read one narrative and then the next narrative would just be rehashing what just happened, but from a different perspective, which at times was really nice to have, but really that's probably what made the book so long, was because something would happen in one chapter with a narrative and you would kind of get the understanding of how that person was feeling. And then in the next chapter, it would completely talk about what just happened for a couple pages and then how that person felt. So not necessary, kind of just extra fluff that I really didn't need. At times, like I said, it was important, but only when certain events happened. If we just had a chapter on them traveling through the forest or traveling through the desert, I don't need to hear about how the other person was feeling about traveling through the forest and desert. Not necessary. So that was kind of the other little ticking point for me. Overall, it was a really great read, and once I was able to sit down and read this, it was awesome. Pace is great. The action parts are awesome. The character development is phenomenal. She really knows what she's doing with her world building as well as her character growth and development, as well as sibling relationships. I'm curious to know if she has a sibling because that was really, really well done. And I mean, sibling relationships in books is some of my favorite character growth. And it was just so cool to see just a bunch of people kind of having story arcs in different ways, but watching them grow from, page 1 to page 500. With that said, there was definitely some plot holes, but I think that's because she's leaving that purposely so we get a little bit more in book 2. I'm really looking forward to book 2. I loved this. I would recommend it if you are a fantasy lover. If you are a high fantasy lover, like you like reading adult fantasy, this is definitely a YA book I would recommend, just because it is a higher level of fantasy than I see in most YA. So if you don't really like the pace or the childish nature of young adult books, this one, Children of Blood and Bone, is for you. It's the perfect bridge between adult and young adult. Give it a try and let me know what you think. All right, so that was my review for this wonderful Sunday. Don't forget, in 2 more episodes, so today and the next episode are going to be our last episodes on Sundays, and then we're moving to Mondays. So make sure to look for that. I'm also getting my Owl Crate for this month, and that will be coming this coming week, so make sure to look for that YouTube video of me unboxing. I hope to see you all next week, and let me know what you thought of this episode. I hope you have a wonderful week reading, and don't forget, pick up Children of Blood and Bone.